raise awareness of its existence. When we get down to Fort Washington Way, down over the overpass, we'll all line up out there so that the traffic underneath as it drives past, they'll all see it right up there in big, bold letters.
You done with TPP? No.
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 Yeah, that's
So who knows what the World Trade Organization is?
I forget.
Some people. Okay. So basically, the World Trade Organization was a worldwide organization set up to regulate free trade all over the world.
TPP is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it is a treaty being written between the United States and I believe at this point it's 12 other countries, possibly more.
The TPP is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. TPP is a trade agreement being negotiated between more than 12 countries around the Pacific region. It has more than 26 chapters, and it covers a broad spectrum of issues, from trade of dairy, meat, textiles, and automobiles, to financial regulation, to labor regulations, and more.
I believe it's somewhere between 30 and 40% of global GDP is tied up in the European Union, and this is going to create, I believe, if it goes through 60% of the world's GDP. So you're going to have a global partnership of treaty countries that are going to make rules.
But to me, the most troubling aspect is how so much of it's being negotiated behind closed doors. So much of it is basically a backdoor method of enacting legislation domestically in all of these countries around the world that they couldn't pass on their own. In our case, you got SOPA that's rolled into there, couldn't pass it through Congress, so they're going to roll into this bill, try to pass it as a trade deal. So they're going to be able to pass legislation through our Congress, but the disguise will mean something else. Just a wolf in sheep's clothing, basically.
The TPP flip-flop. No, it's not a dance move. It's backpedaling of rhetoric from the Obama administration regarding the power of multinational corporations. A controversial portion of the so-called free trade agreement between 9 nations has now been leaked. It allows foreign corporations operating in the U.S. to appeal regulations to an international tribunal that could overrule U.S. law. So
You need to know this. The Obama administration is preparing to sell America out to a handful of private corporations. Well, more than a handful, but anyhow, that's because right now President Obama is preparing to push through the largest trade deal in human history, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or as it's more commonly known, the TPP. If approved, the TPP would create a whole new set of rules regulating the economies of 12 countries. The red countries seen here on 4 different continents bordering the Pacific Ocean. These rules cover everything from pharmaceuticals to digital copyright law and could permanently change the way everyday Americans and people all over the world interact with the global economy. So if you think the Obama administration, you would think, as a result of this, that the Obama administration would want to keep the public as up to date as possible on such a big trade deal, right? Wrong. The United States has negotiated the TPP almost entirely in secret with the help of about 600 private corporations. Most of what we know about it actually comes from leaked documents, and those documents paint a pretty scary picture. Now, thanks to WikiLeaks, we have an even better idea of just how dangerous the TPP really is. Earlier today, WikiLeaks released a full draft of the treaty's intellectual property rights chapter. The 95-page document proves what many people have long suspected, that the TPP isn't so much a free trade deal as it is a giant giveaway to monster transnational corporations. According to WikiLeaks, the TPP would allow private foreign corporations to sue countries over regulations that those corporations don't like. It would allow them to expand the monopoly powers of pharmaceutical patents. And it would also give corporations the go-ahead to start blocking websites accused of violating copyright law. The documents also show that the Obama administration, on behalf of the United States, has been pushing for some of the TPP's harshest intellectual property laws. To put it bluntly, the TPP would sacrifice national sovereignty, public health, and internet freedom, all in the name of helping private corporations keep their CEOs' wallets fat and their shareholders happy. That's why the TPP is so much more dangerous than normal trade deals like NAFTA or CAFTA. Not only does it reward companies that send jobs overseas and gut regulations that keep big businesses in check, it also increases corporate control over pretty much every part of how you and I interact with the world and makes it near impossible for countries to fight back against giant corporations. As Julian Assange said about the leaked documents, if instituted, the TPP's intellectual property regime would trample over individual rights and free expression, as well as ride roughshod over the intellectual and creative commons. If you read, write, publish, think, listen, dance, sing, or invent, if you farm or consume food, if you're ill now or one day might be ill, the TPP has you in its crosshairs. In other words, it puts the rights of profit-driven businesses over the rights of human beings and the governments that we form to protect ourselves. No wonder, then, that the Obama administration doesn't even want Congress to take a closer look at the TPP. To push the U.S. into the proposed treaty as soon as possible, the president is trying to use a special legislative trick called fast-tracking that would prevent lawmakers from making any amendments to the TPP.
So if we want a new trade agreement that is fair to consumers and is fair to farmers and people who are manufacturing goods and doing the labor to manufacture those goods, we want fair trade and not free trade. Free trade is something that it just takes all the roadblocks out of the way, including food safety and all kinds of different things, for corporations to freely be able to trade back and forth in between countries. So there are lots of different ramifications for this. Like, for instance, of course, a huge corporation, if they need labor and they've got this free trade agreement, they're going to go get labor where they can get the cheapest labor, right? And so how can companies that are trying to do things fairly compete with that? They can't compete with that.
And it's going to end up looking something like, if you look at all 17 countries and you say, what is the absolute worst rule for labor? Whatever country's the worst is going to be universal across all 17 countries. What's the worst for healthcare? What's the worst for copyright? What's the worst for medical issues and patents? The worst from each of those countries is going to be made universal across all the countries involved. Come learn about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Learn about what your government is doing for you. Stop the TPP.
Some legislators have seen some bits and pieces of the text of it. But for the most part, this is something that's happening in secret. And the Obama administration right now wants to get something that is called fast track. It's one of the things that was used in the Nixon era, and it's been used to negotiate free trade deals historically, because you can't really necessarily get we talked to Steve Shabbat, our representative here not too long ago, and he actually said, the problem with doing it through Congress is that you're never going to get an agreement. And I'm going, well, doesn't that tell you something? Like, if you have to do this kind of thing in secret, then isn't there a huge problem with it? If you can't do it through a democratic process, then maybe we shouldn't have it at all, right?
Who's down with TPP? Hell no, not me! Who's down with TPP? Hell no, not me!
And my stance on it, I work for Food and Water Watch. Our stance on it as an organization is that it should not go through, and particularly the vote coming up is going to be on fast track, and we're against giving President Obama the authority to negotiate the details of the trade deal in secret for only a yes or no vote in the Congress, because it takes away our democracy and our ability to actually have a say in what is in this trade deal and whether or not the trade deal passes.
So that's my deepest concerns lie with that aspect of the bill above all else, because if there was really truly good things in this bill, we should be able to discuss it and debate it and decide that it's a good thing that we all agree upon together, instead of it being decided behind closed doors. That's look great, so you know, very visible.
It usurps the Constitution that we will see people that are looking at getting paid $250 a week to do work right now that is minimum wage, and we're everything you hear about Chinese labor camps, and that you hear at the Apple store where they put suicide nets outside the factory making iPhones, so the workers can't even kill themselves. They're not allowed. They're caught in nets. That is the kind of treatment that we're going to see go global with this treaty, and that is why we're here to stop it.